Hi guys, this is Rick with the Switch List. Thanks for stopping by to watch this video. Just a quick update on what's been going on the last couple months. I haven't put a video out in a while, been kind of busy with some other things that I've been focused on and haven't done a lot with the layout. But I did want to go ahead and Drew Steele 69 kind of pinged me when I left a comment on one of his videos about asking me about or telling me he's looking forward to the next layout update. So I thought I'd put together something. I shot a few bits and pieces here and there, so we'll try and make a video out of it, and hopefully you guys will enjoy it. So what I'm doing here is I'm working, one of the big projects I continue to work on is getting all the track laid in Baltimore Yard, handling all the track and turnouts in that yard. And while it's not a huge yard, it's not a tiny yard, and it's taking me some time to get it done. So here's me using this jig that I built for spacing the ties. The jig is basically laid out on I think it's 80 thousandths styrene that I use, the big sheet there, and then I use strip styrene for the spacing between the ties, as well as a horizontal bar there to line the ties up. So here you can see the first thing I did is I put in my PCB ties. These are Fast Track pre-gapped PCB ties, and I put those in every 10th tie, starting from the 4th tie on the left, which in this picture is the 4th tie on the right. So I get those in, and then I'm putting all the Fast Track's ties in all the remaining spots. So this jig is about 12 inches long. I keep saying I should extend it all the way out farther, but you know what? After you do 12 inches worth of this stuff, it's nice to take a break, and the break that comes with taking the ties out and moving on to the next section. So probably would make more sense if it was longer, but this is what I do. So anyway, you can see here I got sometimes I run into ties that don't quite fit, like right there, and that is because some of the ties are a little bit smaller, some of the ties are a little bit larger. So when I first laid this jig out, obviously I had some ties that were smaller, and wherever those smaller ties were used in creating this jig, then that gives me a problem with trying to get the larger ties to go in. But fortunately you can always find a tie to fit. So get all the ties in, and here I've got it all completed. And now what I do is I take some masking tape, and of course I've never had this problem, but now that I'm doing it for people watching me on the video, I'm struggling with just getting the end of the tape off. But I'm going to pull a piece of tape out and lay that on top of the ties. Then that allows me to pull that section of ties off, and then I can just take that strip of ties over, put them down, and we'll see that here in the next section of this video. Okay, so here we are over at Baltimore Yard, and you can see right there laying on top of that piece of flex track is my strip of ties that I'm getting ready to put down. I use the yardstick there to help me try to keep the track reasonably straight, or at least the ties reasonably straight down the length of the track. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put glue on each individual tie. Originally I just spread glue down all over the area where the ties were going to go, and what you end up with is a lot of glue in between the ties, and I just decided I didn't like it, and it probably ultimately doesn't matter because it'll all get covered with ballast. But I've started going with this idea of just taking a few seconds and putting the glue on each individual tie. This allows me to get better coverage on each tie and make sure each tie has a consistent amount of glue on it to help glue that down to the cork. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead. I've finished laying all the tie strips for the rest of this track. And so what I'm doing here is I'm created this little tool to help spread the micro-engineering rail joiners, Quid 83 rail joiners. They are really tight. So I found that sometimes having that little piece of rail that I've filed down the edges of to make it slide into the rail joiner easier, and then that helps spread the rail joiner out just enough to be able to then put it on. So now what I'm going to do is attach a section of rail to the rail that's already been put down. Get it laid out, do the second one, and this is running at 2x speed just to try to move a little bit quickly through it here. And we won't watch this whole section, but just kind of give you an idea of how I approach getting the rail down. So I use some track spacing gauges there, just to kind of hold the track in general, keep the rails parallel down the length of the rail and center them on the ties. So as I solder the rail to the PCB ties, I try to make sure I keep the rail centered on the ties the whole way down, and hopefully that will hopefully the ties were laid fairly straight thanks to the yardstick, and then the rails will be straight and centered on the ties themselves. So here I'm just soldering the rail joiner, the two rails together, and then from here I will go and solder in all the PCB ties. Okay, so I finished soldering the rail to all the PCB ties, so I'll give it a quick run test with a car there. I always like to see the car run and make sure the track is okay before I go ahead and start spiking it. And so now we move on to the final step here, which is to go ahead and spike the rail to the ties. And what I do is I spike the rail down every third tie. So every third tie I put 4 spikes in, one on each side of the rail. And as I mentioned before, the spikes are not providing any real mechanical stability or really responsible for maintaining gauge. That's all done by the PCB tie. So the ties are really the spikes are really just aesthetic, and I think that every third tie gives a nice happy medium between looking good and not having to spend my entire life spiking these down. So it'll take me probably about an hour to spike this section of track here. So I will use the magic of video editing to get us to the end. Okay, and here I am putting in the very last spike on this yard track, and as you'll see here, I'll do a test with the cars, and I'll come across a bump, which turns out to be one of the spikes wasn't pushed completely down against the flange of the rail. So once I pushed that down, everything ran smooth. So that completes the departure track, which is the one I just was working on, and the next one closest to me is the arrival track, and then the one closest to the edge of the layout is the staging yard entrance. Someday that piece of flex track is just there for now. And so I have 3 yard tracks left, plus the drill track. 3 yard tracks on this side, there's a couple of coach yard tracks on the other side, so long ways to go. So another thing that I've started working on is as you come out of Baltimore Yard, there's a transition here very quickly as you go. We'll ignore that hole for a second. As you come over here, right down here is where Towson is. So I wanted to try and have some kind of a scene separator, and so what I was thinking it would be nice is I have this trestle kit, this Blair Line open deck timber trestle, so that I bought a while ago and I wanted to make use of. So what I thought I would do is I wanted to put it right here. This is the drill lead for the Baltimore Yard, so I'm going to put some trees and stuff here and separate it, and then have a gully or a small river, and have this little trestle try to give me a little bit of a scene separation from Baltimore Yard down on the right to as you come into Towson on the left. The trestle is 2 inches tall, so I needed 2 inches below the surface, the track, in order to use the trestle. So I just cut the foam and the plywood out there, and what I'll do is I will put some spacer, 3/4 inch plywood underneath there, and then I will screw in a piece of 1/2 inch plywood. Unfortunately, that piece you see back there not quite big enough, but that's the idea, and then I'll screw that into the bottom, so then that'll give me my 2 inches from the top of the foam down to where the bottom of the trestle will be. So hopefully by the time I do my next layout update, that will actually have progressed and look like something more than a hole in the middle of the railroad. Okay, and we will wrap up this video with a brief clip of the first train departing out of Baltimore Yard. I actually got the power bus run all the way to the end of the benchwork there on the right, put all the drops in for the main line track here, which is actually what the train is on, as well as the arrival track, which is the next one in. I haven't wired up the departure track, which is the one that I was showing you during the hand laying. But this is the first train coming out of Baltimore Yard under power, and you can't go very far; it'll fall into a hole in the benchwork. But at least we've got some progress here in the yard in terms of being able to run a train around and start checking out all the track work. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Not much of an update, but at least you have an idea what I've been up to for the last 2 months, what little bit of train stuff I've been up to for the last 2 months. Thanks again for watching. If you like this stuff, please consider subscribing, liking the video. Until next time, I will see you down the rails.